I'm going to go ahead and call the City Council meeting February the 15th to order. Sonner, would you please call the roll?
Petty.
Here.
Tennant.
Here.
Farrell.
Here.
Adams. Here. Lewis. Gray. Here. Teal. Here. Kenyon.
Here.
Mayor Jordan.
Here. Would you join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, the first order of business that we have under presentations, reports, and discussion items, I believe that Connie Edmondson has an award that the city received that she'd like to announce.
Mayor and City Alderman, I am pleased to announce that the Arkansas Recreation and Park Association awarded Fayetteville Park Trail System as the best in the state of Arkansas. So we're very proud of that. And I was just going to add a little bit more onto this. This is not only the way we build them, by saving money, by designing them in-house and having them built in-house, but it goes on to the different programs we have, such as the Adopt a Trail program, the Trail Tracker program, the videos that we have on our website and government station that teaches people etiquette and how to ride your bicycles safely. And these are just many of the things. And the wayfinders that we have out that shows a map of where the trail goes. So we're very proud of the trail systems that we have and the support that you all have given us. So thank you all.
Connie, I'd like to say, of course, myself and the City Council can chime in however they want to, but I think you do a tremendous job running the Parks Department. So to you and your staff, a great round of applause.
Thank you.
All right. That's the fun part of the evening. All right. The next thing we have is an airport report from Ray Boudreaux. Ray, how are you this evening?
Fine, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and members of the council for allowing your airport board to give their annual report to the council. First thing I'd like to do is introduce the board. We have Chairman Bob Nickel on the end, Mr. Tim McCarley, Mr. Rick Bailey, Mr. Janice Stanisic, and of course Dr. Arnold Lohr. We have one empty position. One person who's not here, of course, but we have one empty position, and we have two applicants here tonight, Nate Griffey and Josh Mahoney. I'd also like to introduce my assistant and right-hand man, James Nicholson, who's going to run the slides for us tonight, and my secretary, Lou Powers, back there, who actually runs the airport.
Yes.
2010 was a good year, and 2010 was not so good a year. Activity was down, revenue was down, occupancy rates were down, sales were down, and all of our base businesses were under a great deal of stress due to the nationwide industry downturn. Airport staff, however, tightened the screws and kept spending below revenues and ended the year in the black for the third year in a row. That's operational revenues over operational expenses, which is evidenced by the airport cash balance increasing 2009 to 2010. Of great help was the City Council approval of a resolution to refinance our loan for the two corporate hangars, allowing us to reduce the monthly rent amount to help our two largest tenants while keeping budget revenue relatively unchanged. Thank you very much. Our first-class fixed-base operator, Millionaire Fayetteville, which provides fuel and line services and excellent customer service, agreed to a 5-year contract renewal in 2010 with very few changes to the original contract provisions. Their staff performed with excellence throughout the year, highlighted by the successful contract negotiations with the Defense Energy Support Center, DESC, for fuel sales to military and government aircraft at the airport. Military activity has increased significantly since that contract was approved. Our first-class FAA Part 141 flight school also agreed to renew their contract this year for office space and their corporate and maintenance hangar, with very few changes to the original agreement. The airport board agreed to lease T-hangars for storage to keep the revenue coming in. From a high of 9 empty hangars, we are now down to only 2 empty hangars. The board also agreed to lease the former school hangar for large vehicle storage, which helps us pay the heating bill for that big building. Wings Avionics renewed their contract this year and continue to have good business from local and out-of-state customers. Aviation maintenance professionals became Devol Aviation and continues to grow their business. Ross Executive Aviation continues to show signs of growth, and Affair to Remember, the caterer, met their end-of-year goals and has developed new catering customers at all airports in Northwest Arkansas. Rose of Sharon, our event florist, maintained their market share in 2010 as well. Our post office, the Greenland Post Office, which rents space in our building, showed an increase and was one of the very few post offices to show a profit in 2010. Our base businesses are positioned well to be able to maximize their opportunity as the industry recovers in 2011. The airport made significant progress in 2010 toward achieving its vision to lead Fayetteville and Northwest Arkansas with strategic and innovative aviation services and solutions designed to foster economic growth and commerce in an ever-changing environment, and the environment definitely is changing. As we completed our first major project of our infrastructure upgrade, the Runway 116 Safety Area Improvement Project, completed this year, made a significant improvement in the approach from the north, not only for aircraft but for the public, as they crest the hill and approach Drake Field. The realigned roadway gives surface traffic a wide berth and the aircraft traffic an uncluttered approach to the runway. We are already working on a new and improved instrument approach from the north and hope to have at least the new GPS LPV, which is localizer with vertical guidance, in place by the end of this year. Correcting our only airport safety deficiency positioned us to be able to request a runway extension in the future as operations of the critical aircraft approach 500 annually. The critical aircraft is one that must degrade its payload and or its fuel load to depart the airport due to limited runway length. This $4 million FAA State Aeronautics 100% grant-funded project started 3 years ago. Here you will see the realigned roadway, Highway 71. The old road used to be right here. Here you'll see the rechanneled Airport Branch Creek, which we moved out of the safety area and which now provides a wonderful park-like setting for people to stop and watch airplanes take off and land, just south of the realigned Ernest Lancaster Road. Our safety area now is in full compliance with FAA standard. Loomacres Wildlife Management Incorporated began an FAA-required wildlife hazard assessment of our airport in 2010. This 100% funded FAA and State Aeronautics funded project will result in a management plan to use to eliminate hazards to flight on and near the airport. Our maintenance team already keeps a watchful eye on the wildlife hazards and eliminates hazards when possible, but a formal plan with proactive measures will help improve the safety of the airfield as it pertains to wildlife in the natural state. The Arkansas Aeronautics Commission approved a grant to improve the inventory management and overfill protection systems of the airport bulk fuel storage facility. This vital safety project upgraded the fuel farm safety systems, which ensures pure product for our customers and accurate inventory for Millionaire Fayetteville, our fixed base operator. The airport staff upgraded our airport web pages on the City of Fayetteville website and started a presence on Facebook. James Nicholson led this effort and now manages our presence to respond and post promptly and to keep information fresh and accurate. We are planning on better numbers for 2011, we hope. All industry forecasts indicate slow but steady recovery beginning this year, and Our area of the country was slow to feel the downturn, so we would hope it would be fast to feel the improvement. We have several projects to work on. We plan to design and complete a project to remove approach path obstructions to the south end of the airport with your approval. It is on your agenda tonight for your consideration. FAA has indicated that the project could receive funding this year. However, the budget's being worked on for the FAA as we speak. We will work with the FAA terminal approach folks to get the new instrument approach published for runway 16. We may have located a glide slope in storage that we could acquire and install to make our localizer only approach from the north a full ILS approach. We will continue to pursue a scheduled charter operation between Drake and Little Rock to support our business community. We will develop a project to repair the pavement on the terminal apron, which is deteriorating badly, but must include drainage improvements to avoid flooding the terminal building. Introduce Wayne Jones, our airport engineer, who's helping us design that project. We will strive to improve our public perception in 2011, and will work with the airport board, the aviation community, to host events and projects that will receive wide public approval and acknowledgement of the economic, recreation, transportation, and disaster support contributions of their airport. We will work hard to increase revenues and keep expenses down. In summary, we have a number of challenges ahead. The aviation business has taken a big hit during this economic downturn, evidenced by the fact that our aircraft operations in 2010 were the lowest in a decade. A number of T-hangar tenants sold their aircraft, and consequently our operating revenue was less due to those vacancies. We are fortunate that we have a solid base of small aircraft owners who choose to operate from Drake Field, and that all of our based businesses are top-of-the-line performers. This is a photo of the first flight in Fayetteville in 1911. Wow. This year, 2011, is the 100th anniversary of flight in Fayetteville. Our aviation museums are immeasurable historic and educational assets to the region, and they have managed modest growth of their collections and service to the community while facing dwindling financial resources. The economic environment of the past year has caused us considerable stress in our mutual goal of sustaining our superior aviation facility. Our biggest task in 2011 is to do our part to help our Drake Field commercial and not-for-profit partners succeed to position ourselves for future by providing the best maintained, most attractive, and most customer service-oriented GA airport in the region. We believe that our airport is positioned well for the future and look to our board, our partners, and our customers for help as we work to be the best we can be. Thank you for your kind attention. I would answer questions if you have any.
Well, I'd just like to say, Ray, I think you and the staff of the airport board do a fantastic job down there. I want to give you my thanks, and I'm sure I can speak to the council.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Council.
Okay. Now for the consent agenda. Number one, approval of the October 18, 2010 Joint Fireman's Pension and City Council February 1st, 2011 City Council meeting minutes. Number two, bid number 11-15, Elk River Construction Incorporated, a resolution awarding bid number 11-15 and authorizing a contract with Elk River Construction Incorporated in the amount of $84,825 plus a 5% project contingency for the construction of stream restoration at Neocoska Creek and Sweetbriar Park, and approving a budget adjustment of $9,066. Bid number 11-17, ADS Environmental Services LLC, a resolution awarding bid number 11-17 and authorizing the purchase of 17 sewer flow monitors from ADS Environmental Services LLC in the amount of $136,528.63 for installation in the city sewer collection system. Number four, police recording system, a resolution approving a budget adjustment in the amount of $43,000, moving unused funds designated for the police recording system to the Police Building Remodeling Project. And- Okay, number 5, Ogden Insurance Agency donation revenue. A resolution approving a budget adjustment in the amount of $100 representing donation revenue received from Ogden Insurance Agency for the Fire Department's annual Employee Service Awards event. Number 6, Garver LLC. Resolution approving a contract with Garver LLC in the amount not to exceed $38,200 for the performance of an environmental assessment study for the Van Ash Boulevard Extension project between Gregg Avenue and Garland Avenue. Number 7, McClellan Consulting Engineers, Incorporated Task Order Number 7. Resolution approving a task order Number 7 for the contract with McClellan Consulting Engineers, Incorporated, contingent upon receipt of grant funding, authorizing the application and acceptance of a grant from the Federal Aviation Administration and the Arkansas Department of Aeronautics to fund the project and approving a budget adjustment. Number 8, Atlantic Machinery Incorporated, resolution authorizing the purchase of a Swartz A9000 sweeper from Atlantic Machinery Incorporated of Silver Springs, Maryland, pursuant to a competitive bid through the National Joint Powers Alliance Cooperative Purchasing Agreement in the amount of $190,100 for use by the Transportation Division and approving a budget adjustment. I'll entertain a motion to accept the consent agenda as read.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to accept the consent agenda as read. Sandra, would you please call the roll?
Petty,
Yes.
Tennant,
Yes.
Farrell,
Yes.
Adams,
Yes.
Gray,
Yes.
Teal,
Yes.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Okay. Under unfinished business, number 1, amend Title 15, ADM 09-3480, Streamside Protection, ordinance amending Title 15, Unified Development Code, the City of Fayetteville, to amend Chapter 155, Appeals, Chapter 156, Variances, and Chapter 168, Flood Damage Prevention Code, in order to establish streamside protection zones and adopt a protected streams map and best management practices manual. I will entertain the motion to go to the second reading.
I move we go to the second reading.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to go to the second reading. Sandra, would you please call the roll?
Petty, Tennant,
Yes.
Farrell, Adams,
Yes.
Gray,
Yes.
Teal,
Yes.
Kenyon,
Yes.
An ordinance amending Title 15 Unified Development Code of the City of Fayetteville to amend Chapter 155 Appeals, Chapter 156 Variances, and Chapter 168 Flood Damage Prevention Code in order to establish streamside protection zones and adopt a protected streams map and a best management practices manual.
We're going to start off tonight because there was a lot of questions that was asked a couple of weeks ago. So I've had staff review those questions. Karen's going to answer as many of those questions as we can. And if you have anything more you'd like to add, then you may. And so, Karen, if you'd like to start us off.
Sure. And good evening, Mayor and members of the council. We went through all the comments that we heard at the last council meeting, and so I've tried to address some specific questions that we heard, and then also just broader questions about the ordinance in general, as well as some of the ones that came up at agenda session. And probably one of the more memorable comments was from Mrs. Stevens. She had property on Cato Springs, and she had talked about having been asked several times for easements or use of her property. And so we did research that to find out what had happened there, because it seemed like things hadn't been communicated that well. One was that Washington County had asked and received an easement for access to their new site, so where the new jail facility was. So they were looking at getting access off of that property, and ultimately they decided to use Clydesdale Road, but they did get an easement on that property. So it was Washington County, not the city of Fayetteville in that instance. And the second item that was mentioned was an easement for trails, and both Mr. and Mrs. Stevens participated in the Fayette Junction Master Plan, and at that time there was a conceptual idea of trails that would have utilized their property. That has been in the conceptual phase. It was never pursued. So there was never a discussion or any easement asked for or granted. It was simply a conceptual idea when we were working on that master plan. And then the third item that was talked about was Cato Springs Road. And that's true. Part of that property was used for the road widening project, and the property owners were compensated for the right-of-way there. One other question we heard was What about phosphates in dish detergent? Have we looked at banning that? In fact, Arkansas passed legislation in January 1994 that limited phosphate in laundry detergent to 0.5% by weight, which was equal to the most strict bans in the country. And then dish detergent manufacturers have stopped using phosphate in dish detergent since the 16-state ban was enacted in July 2010. Those were some specific questions that we heard that we wanted to address right away. We know council members had questions about that. We also heard a lot of comments about the science behind the riparian buffer and its effectiveness and how it's utilized. And I have compiled a bibliography that I can share with you of the research that was used. But one of the studies that I do keep mentioning was a study that was a meta-analysis. And the reason I say meta-analysis and why that's important is because that's one of the most scientifically rigorous things you can do. It really takes a body of research that can be compared. And in this case, it was 60 different studies across the country. So this is different from saying, well, Maryland had this finding and New Mexico had this finding, but this was looking at 60 studies across the country that looked at riparian buffers, how effective they were at filtering out, in this case, nitrogen. And it's important because it controls for variation among those studies or particular biases. And so that's why we really relied on that study when we were looking at buffer width and whether this would be an effective ordinance for the city of Fayetteville. We also looked at local research and analysis, and we are very fortunate because the Arkansas Department of Environmental Quality did a study of the West Fork of the White River, which is an impaired stream, or it means it's unhealthy for wildlife and humans in that case. And what they looked at, and this was actually, I think, Councilmember Tennant's question about the breakdown of pollutants and where they're coming from. And this was a very careful study of that river, and it drains into Beaver Lake, ultimately, which is why it's important. And they found that pasture land was the greatest contributor at about 65% of non-point source pollutants, but urban areas were 22%. And of the urban area, Fayetteville was responsible for approximately 71% of the pollution, which is because we're the largest urban area in that watershed. And you can see that jump in terms of urban area. I think it almost doubled from 2000 to 10 years before they did the study, because we're growing. It means everyone knows we're one of the fastest growing areas in the country. You've all seen the recent census numbers. And so unless we are going to implement some sort of no-growth policy, we know that our urban area is going to increase, as well as our non-point source pollution. And so this ordinance is really meant to be a proactive approach. There was a question about, well, is some of this coming from commercial, is some of this coming from residential, what's the breakdown there? This study only broke it down by agricultural versus urban, and then I think they also had construction and development. It's in the nutrient reduction plan as well, the breakdown. But the other thing I want to point out, because I've had several property owners talk to me and say, well, why can't you just regulate the people who are polluting? And I want to state pretty clearly that this is not targeting who we think the polluters are. The thing about non-point source pollution is that it can come from a lot of different places. And when there's a rain event, the water is naturally going to flow over the land into a creek. And so what the buffer does for everyone is it helps filter out those pollutants wherever they may be coming from. So it's not targeting the property owners that we think are dumping things into the stream. It's really to handle what happens in a natural rain event when you have water flowing over the land and into the creek. It's the last stand before it enters the creek. I also brought some photos to show you why this is a benefit to individual property owners, because we've seen some of the erosion problems that can happen when people aren't maintaining a healthy riparian buffer. And they're pretty compelling photos, I think, of the damage that has been done when there haven't been healthy buffers in place. One of the other questions we got was, I think a general question was, how are city activities that are detrimental to water quality going to be regulated? And then a specific question about trails. So I wanted to state up front that the city would have to comply with everything in this ordinance. It is not exempt from anything. Everything that a private property owner would have to do, the city would have to do also. Specifically in regard to trails, Alderman Farrell asked a question about how much of our existing impervious trail surface lies within that first 25 feet. So in the ordinance as it's stated, a trail, if it's located in that first 25 feet, would have to comply with the Best Management Practices Manual. And it doesn't actually say trails. It says a 12-foot width of impervious surface. So this could be a property owner who needs to put in a driveway. They would need to comply with the Best Management Practices Manual as well. And of our existing trails, we have 18 miles of trails. 1.78 miles, or less than 10%, of the existing trail system is in the first 25 feet. About half of that is in an existing utility easement. And I mentioned this, that one of the reasons we would allow trails there is because if there's an existing utility easement, it makes more sense to put the trail where there's already disturbed land rather than disturbing more of that riparian buffer.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Karen? Just because it's in a utility easement doesn't remove the problem that it's in the riparian zone, which is what we're going to forbid other people to put to do after property changes. Is that correct?
They would still be allowed to put in the same width of impervious surface
Well,
if they follow the best
if
management
If
practices.
the property changes hands at some particular time,
Right.
they would still be able to do that?
Yes.
Another question, and stop me if you're getting to this, the planned, the projected miles that are coming up, how many of those in our trail system are going to be in or directly adjacent to the riparian zone?
Right, and so this is an important question as well. What we know is that 20% of our future trails follow a stream corridor. But what I want to say is when you look at that master trails plan, the line on the map can be deceptive because it's a negotiation for the easement, right? It's different from, say, the master street plan, where if you see the street on there, there's a certain amount of wiggle room, but you kind of know where the street's going to go. It's a bit different with the trail system because it ends up being more of a negotiation, so that line on the map isn't as hard and fast as, say, the master street plan. What we do know, and what the trails coordinator has stated, is that one, we typically try to locate outside of the first 25 feet because the city has concerns about maintaining the integrity of the trail because of erosion problems on that stream. So typically we try to locate outside of that 25 feet. However, if there's an existing utility easement, like I mentioned before, it might make more sense to put it there. And two, when I said some of our existing trails within that 25 feet, you have to remember a lot of that was along Skull Creek. And that is that's a creek where development is really close to the creek, and in some cases there may not have been another place to put it. But the city would have to follow all the best management practices, and again, this also, private property owners are allowed that 12-foot width of impervious surface as well because they may need to put in a driveway or have another purpose. And I think the question came up, well, and this came up at the Planning Commission as well. Well, let's say you have 100 feet of property, and you say we can put in a 12-foot wide trail. That's 120 square feet of impervious surface. Why can't I just put 120-foot footprint, square foot building somewhere because it's the same amount of impervious surface? Does that make sense? So it's a question of just total impervious surface. Mm-hmm. And the answer is a question, it's about velocity. You're right, the filtration is going to be the same, but remember when we keep talking about this, we're talking about slowing down the water as it enters into the creek so you're not causing a lot of erosion. So imagine that I had a spray bottle with a certain amount of water, and I had a glass of water with the same amount of water. And I could take the spray bottle and spray everyone, and it would disperse the water. It'd be going pretty slow. Or I could take the same amount of water and just dump it on one person. And that's the difference. That's why we're saying if you have a parallel strip of impervious surface to that creek, that is very different from having 120 square foot footprint, whether it's a building or a basketball court or what have you. I think there was also several comments about modifications that could be made to the ordinance, and so I want to address those because we do have 2 amendment proposals. One was that clarification about gardening, because it said you can follow the best management practices when it comes to gardening, which were basically that you locate your rows parallel to the stream so you're not getting that runoff directly into the stream, and that you have some sort of buffer around that garden if you're within that first 25 feet. And then what was confusing is that in the prohibited list it said cultivation, and people are saying what's the difference? Staff agreed that can be confusing, and so what we are suggesting is that in subsection E21, which currently says management of lawns and gardens but no mechanized gardening is allowed. We are saying change that so it would just say management of lawns and gardens, take out the mechanized language, and then in subsection E2.1, take out mechanized, or E2L, sorry, take out mechanized cultivation entirely, which I think will make it clearer to everyone that gardening is absolutely allowed. There are best management practices that would need to be followed if it were in that first 25 feet, but that you absolutely are allowed to have your garden. And if you already have a garden, it's not even an issue. You simply maintain that use. The other question we got about modifications to the ordinance was about defining woody vegetation. And I think actually Alderman Farrell, you went on a site visit to a property and there was that question about, is this woody vegetation or is it not? And how do we tell? And what we were proposing is to change that language in subsection E2C. Right now it says clearing of non-invasive woody vegetation. And in the best management practices manual, it very clearly states why woody vegetation is important, why.
Slow down.
Oh, sure.
Slow down.
Is it too
Sorry,
fast?
So
Okay.
fast.
Do you need me to go back to gardens or are you?
No,
Okay.
just, you're talking really fast.
Okay.
And it's hard to.
Currently in the ordinance, it says clearing of non-invasive woody vegetation. And that's important because even if you have bushes, especially if they're native bushes, they may have deep roots that are holding that bank together. But we agree that it could be confusing for someone just reading it to determine, is this woody vegetation or is it not? Am I allowed to mow it? So what we are proposing to do is change it so that it says clearing of non-invasive trees. I think trees are much easier for everyone to understand rather than just saying woody vegetation. The third comment that we had about something specific in the ordinance was, why does the city engineer have the power to administratively change the best management practices manual? And staff proposes keeping that the same. And the reason we had it in there was because the BMP manual doesn't have an exhaustive list of all the best management practices that exist or could be developed, and especially in the area of stormwater management or low impact development, there are emerging technologies, and we wanted developers, property owners to be able to take advantage of those and not have to wait 4 to 6 weeks for a change from the city council. So we thought that our engineering staff would be able to make that determination. This isn't unique. This is the same process we have with the drainage criteria manual, the tree and landscape manual, and the LID manual. A property owner can always appeal staff's decision to the city council, and of course the council can request changes to these manuals at any time if it disagrees with the content. I wanted to talk a little bit about the intent behind the ordinance and why it's a proactive response. I think we heard from a property owner who said, well, all the water in my neighborhood flows into the streets and then dumps into the creek, and why can't we address that problem? And I think when we look back at the way construction or development has occurred, we can find mistakes made by the city, for sure, in terms of water quality. And in fact, that situation would not be allowed to happen today. And that's because over time, the city has taken steps to address water quality and how we build and construct and develop so that we're not degrading our streams. And that's a perfect example of something that is no longer allowed. Even in July of 2010, an ordinance was passed so that you couldn't pipe directly into the stream. You'd have to go through a stilling basin. And these are all examples of measures that have been taken. A lot of people I think have said, well, why can't this be an education-only campaign, or why hasn't the city explored that? And when the city hired geosyntech consultants to come up with a nutrient reduction plan, it really was to find out, well, what are the best recommendations out there? How are we going to get the biggest bang for our buck? And they had a number of different ideas, and it really is not, this is one small piece of the pie. It's not an either or. We can either do this ordinance or do education. We're trying to do a lot of different things. And so to give you an example, we've spent over $100,000 on education and outreach initiatives if you look at all the partnerships that we've formed with different organizations that really specialize in that kind of education and outreach, whether it's with the Illinois River Watershed Partnership, we give $10,000 to a year. We've had multiple partnerships with the Cooperative Extension Office, one specifically for riparian management in the Clear Creek watershed. If you go to the movie theater, you see part of a mass media campaign that has a public service announcement about water quality and how not to pollute the water. So, and then with every stream restoration project, we've also combined that with an outreach component so people can learn about the stream bank restoration process, whether it's at Gully Park, Sweetbriar. And in terms of what we're doing for stream bank restoration, I think this is an example of why we're trying to be proactive and not reactive. Over $1.8 million of taxpayer money has been spent on stream bank restoration in the past 3 years. $300,000 of that was from the city alone. And I actually brought some photos of some of those projects that we've worked on. But we're hoping that with an ordinance like this, you'll have less projects like that in the future where you're trying to fix something. And rather, this is going to prevent it from degrading in the first place. I know that Kit specifically addressed the comments related to whether this was a takings or how does this fit with property law. So I'll definitely defer to our city attorney to talk about that specifically. And I know that Colleen Gaston with Beaver Water District is also here tonight to talk a little bit about the water quality of the lake if you have any questions about that. But I think that that covered the questions, comments that we heard from the last meeting for the most part. I'd be happy to answer more if you have any. I know a number of staff members are here as well. I mentioned that we use local studies and local research, and I provided you with one that was done by the University of Arkansas Division of Agriculture that specifically talks about the functions and values of riparian buffers. And I also brought some photos with me. The first one that I was going to share with you was from Neocoska. This is Sweetbriar Park. And in the two photos, you can see a private property owner who benefited from this project. This was a public project. But this is in 2007, and you can see their shed here and fence and 3 trees along the bank there. You can see some of the erosion problems that are happening. Just 3 years later, that bank has eroded up to that fence. The trees are gone. That's within a very short period of time. And
Karen,
so I
maybe
think,
you need to let
yes,
the
I'm
council see
going
those a little
to
closer.
bring those up to you, but I wanted to say that as an example of how property owners are losing property, and they've been impacted by other things that have been done along that buffer area that we're proposing. That's probably the most striking example, but I did bring some pictures from Neocoska Creek and then some of the other projects where we've done streamside restoration so you can see the amount of erosion that has occurred.
Karen, can I ask you another question for you? Were there some other exceptions on the, that the city got for parks, for like mowing, closer to the water? Or was there at one time in there, were there some things that the city exempted itself from?
No, the project team worked really hard to make sure that public and private property owners are being treated the same. And so whether it's a 12-foot wide impervious surface that's allowed, even maintenance of the drainage channel, so clearing of trees within that channel or removing sediment, private and public property owners will be able to do that. And I'm trying to see if there's anything else there. Maintenance and upgrades of existing utility facilities probably wouldn't apply to most property owners, but that's something that would apply to the city and other utilities.
Okay.
Brenda, you had some questions.
Well, I have one. I've had people say that this ordinance will not allow you to mow within the buffer area.
What the best management practice is, where it says right now in the ordinance, is management of lawns and gardens within that first 25 feet. And when you read the best management practices manual, it says this is what we'd recommend, that you mow on the highest setting, that you mow several times a year rather than every week. And the reason is to let the root system grow and to have more of a buffer in that area. Now, this grandfathers in all current practices. So I think there is a concern, and this applies to our parks too, where some people, and this private property owners as well, they may have built a playground right within that 25-foot area. Certainly that may be true for some parks, and we are certainly not suggesting that you let that grow up and then you are concerned about snakes or whatnot where you have that playground equipment. So that's the reason it's grandfathered in. But we would encourage all property owners to take a look at that, and if possible, even if their existing practice today is to mow, there are very good reasons as to why you should let the grass grow a bit more so that you can maintain a better buffer.
But the ordinance does not have it, no.
No, absolutely not.
I mean, there's a lot of things out there, and I think some things have been clarified. One, I had a call from someone who has, and he's here tonight, and I think he'll speak on that, about the agricultural practices being grandfathered in, basically. In other words, if you do have an area where you ran cattle or livestock, you can continue to do that. I do have one other concern, and that came from someone, and this might relate more to Kev, or he might be able to answer this better. Someone contacted me that, and this might be true in more than one case. He had purchased a lot, almost a quarter of an acre in size. Several years ago, he went to the city, made sure, well, let me preface this by saying that you know, a stream is running right through the middle of this, the spout spring. And he went to the city and made sure he could build on a portion of his lot. It's kind of a strange-shaped lot. And, of course, this will just eliminate being able to build on this lot at all. Now, and there's probably a few other cases like that. Is that something we're going to do in this ordinance? We will not, I mean, someone will not, the property will be absolutely worthless?
No, there is a variance procedure in place for that very reason. In fact, it says the lot cannot be made undevelopable or unbuildable. So that'd be a perfect example of a lot that could qualify for a variance.
Okay, and I wonder if there was some way we could write into the ordinance without a variance process where, and I don't know how to word that, but where lots that are totally unbuildable of a certain size. Do you not see a way that exemption could be written into the ordinance without?
That's already handled in the variance section, and it really needs to be handled on a case-by-case basis. Each individual lot needs to be looked at before you can decide what kind of variances, if it's going to be a reduction in setbacks, reduction in buildable area, or what kind of variance or setback is needed before, so this lot can be, in fact, built upon. And if they are not happy with the variance procedure, they can appeal it to the city council. So before any lot would ever be deemed unbuildable, it will be before this council, and for your determination about whether a variance is appropriate or whether you think that it's not appropriate, and that's when you would take the possible chance of an actual constitutional taking. But I think we need to leave the variance procedure as it is, because this is a case-by-case basis, and you can't make a total general statement and just automatically say every lot's going to be buildable.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Karen?
I have a question.
Okay.
One person wrote to me and said that this area of law is already covered by the flood plan rules. Have you spoken to that, flood plan rules? Am I missing something?
I believe they might be referring to floodway. And floodways are governed by federal law, not city, but this includes areas that may be outside of that floodway.
This is, of course, part of our flood code. This is part of the chapter that has dealing with flood reduction. So there are parts of the other ordinances that we've already passed that would impact anybody that has property with flooding problems. So this is not the only, or they're not the first ordinance that has any effect upon streams and flooding problems.
Right, and this does affect, I mean, it could provide additional capacity for floods, but the the purpose of the two regulations are pretty different. One is related to flooding, and this one is related to nutrient reduction. So while they definitely interact, I think the primary purpose of the two codes are different as well.
Thank you.
Matthew?
Karen, did you say you had two language-related amendments to offer, one regarding gardening and one regarding the definition of woody plants?
Sure, and I'll go back over those again. If you look at,
I think I understand them.
Okay.
I'd like to go
Yes.
ahead and make the motion that we amend the language related to gardening at this time.
Second. Well,
Well, let's let everybody, can I get a few more questions from the council, Matthew? But that's fine, I mean,
I would just like for Karen to go over the gardening section again, because I've had a lot of concerns about that. So if you would, just kind of the
shouldn't be okay
points.
with that.
right, so what we are proposing is that in section E1A, find it, 10, which currently says, it's on page 2 of Exhibit A. It currently says management of lawns and gardens, but no mechanized cultivation is allowed.
Yeah.
And what staff is proposing is that it simply say management of lawns and gardens. And we are also proposing that in section E2L, which is the list of called out prohibited practices, that you simply delete that. Right now it says cultivation, we're saying take it out.
you're taking out cultivation, and back on, my numbers on this hard copy don't line up, but the management of lawns and gardens, but no mechanized cultivation is allowed. What are you saying there now?
We're saying stop after garden. So it says management of lawns and gardens.
Period.
What that means is if you wanted, so first of all, if you have a garden, it doesn't apply, continue doing what you've always done. If you were going to put in a new garden within that first 25 feet, the first thing we would say is, well, if there's another place you can put it, that would probably be better to keep your vegetated buffer, prevent fertilizer from getting into that stream. And also because I have talked to some property owners who talk about how their garden gets washed out every year because the bank overflows. And so our first recommendation would be try to locate it somewhere else if you can. If you cannot, what we are saying is locate your garden so that the rows run parallel to the stream rather than perpendicular, so your runoff is not dumping directly into that stream, and then have some kind of buffer around it to help contain the runoff.
Adela, did you have a question?
That took care of it. I just wanted the garden portion really clarified, because I've had a lot of questions about that.
Just want to be sure everybody's solid on it. Brenda, did you have something?
I have one more quick question. I don't know how quick this is, but what department will be enforcing this? And do you see that we have the staff to go out and measure? Because I think there's going to be a difficulty in measuring these distances.
Right. We actually looked at this because we had concerns about additional workload. So one is, if this is a large development, they have surveyors who can easily determine where this buffer area would be and call it out on a plan. So what we looked at were the people who might be coming in for a building permit, or just simply going to make an addition to their house or put a storage shed in. And we looked at people who were in the floodway or floodplain who had come through our office, and it was less than 10 a year, looking at statistics from the past 4 years. So we were looking at how many times might our floodplains administrator be asked to go out there and actually do a measurement for a property owner. Less than 10 times a year seemed fairly minimal. In terms of enforcement, it would be handled like all of our other codes, right? It's complaint-driven, one. Two, the bulk of the regulation is going to be when people have to come through our office for development or a building permit. That's where we're really going to be doing the review. So some of these items, it is going to be an education process, and we fully anticipate that. And we're hoping that with all the partnerships we formed with the organizations that I mentioned, that we can provide those education materials, because we think that's going to be the real tool that's used.
Okay.
Okay, so let me get some clarification on the amendment, because we're going to take public comment. I want everybody to stay with the amendment. So Matthew, can we have some sort of reading of how it's going to say, or?
Mayor, did you want me to discuss the constitutionality and legality
Yes,
before we
and I
get into
think-
amendments?
Colleen Gaston, do you want to hear from her before we go into the amendment, or how do y'all want to do this?
Mayor, can we add one comment to what Karen just talked about enforcement? Just so you're clear, we walk all streams on a 5-year cycle through our engineering division. So while we have a complaint-driven ordinance, we also have a visual, physical observation that has to take place so that each stream within the city boundary is walked within that 5-year period. So items that don't come up through complaints or items that may not come up through a development process could potentially be identified that way as well.
Good.
Okay? Did you want to talk about the constitutionality of the ordinance?
Well, I think that since several speakers at the last city council meeting questioned both the legality and the constitutionality of this proposed streamside ordinance, I probably should address that. I didn't address it at the last meeting. I think there was snow in the forecast or something. I said earlier, and I still believe, that this proposed ordinance is clearly within the statutory power of the city council to enact. For example, a state statute, ACA 1454-702, states, and I quote, "Municipal corporations shall have the power to prevent pollution of water or injury to waterworks," unquote. That statute lists a reservoir, like Beaver Lake, as one type of waterworks that cities are authorized to protect. This ordinance attempts to protect our drinking water source, Beaver Lake, by reducing by 75% the amount of sediment, which carries phosphorus, into our streams that flow into Beaver Lake and the Illinois River. The Beaver Water District spokesman spoke in favor of this to the City Council at our last meeting because it would protect Beaver Lake as our water source. And thus, I think this particular state statute clearly supports your power to enact this ordinance. And this statute actually even gives the City Council the ability to go 5 miles beyond our city limits to prevent pollution or injury to any stream or source of water. The ordinance does not do that now. But state statute says, for the purpose of establishing and supplying waterworks, any municipal corporation may go beyond its territorial limits. Its jurisdiction to prevent or punish any pollution or injury to the stream or source of water or to the waterworks shall extend 5 miles beyond the corporate limits. The Arkansas Supreme Court has interpreted this particular statute as providing a municipality with the power and duty to protect the comfort and well-being of its citizens by furnishing pure water. And that's the Borland versus City of Fort Smith case, which was decided in 1935. This is not new law. The City Council also has considerable discretion under its police power to regulate activities within or near city limits. In a City of Little Rock case in 1968, the Supreme Court said that this court long ago recognized that the various uses and conflicts of city life required that much be left to the discretion of city authorities, the City Council. The Supreme Court also later said in a case involving the City of Lowell in 1996 that the legislative power that you all have includes discretion to determine the interests of the public as well as the means necessary to protect those interests. Within constitutional limits, the legislative branch is the sole judge of the laws that should be enacted for the protection and welfare of the people and when and how the police power of the state is to be exercised. The Arkansas Supreme Court, in a more recent case in 1998 involving the town of Oak Grove, said that the, quote, mere possibility of a public harm is sufficient basis for a municipality to regulate under its police power. So I believe it is up to the good judgment of the City Council to determine whether protection of streams and drinking water requires some streamside protection zones, which would restrict certain soil disturbing construction or other activities from occurring. After considering all the evidence and statements presented to you, if the City Council determines that the public necessity requires such regulations, the City Council has statutory power to enact reasonable regulations. Now let me turn for a second to the constitutional issue, because some speakers said that it would be a constitutional taking of their property if we pass this ordinance. I do not believe that the proposed ordinance, as they are worded now, would be deemed a constitutional taking. We have in the past been challenged over regulations that a landowner alleged constituted an inverse condemnation of his property. Mr. Richard Berry, who was the owner of the Thunder Valley Raceway, which we had regulated, sued the city for $500,000 in 2003, but Mr. Berry lost. The city paid nothing on this $500,000 claim because it was not a constitutional taking. Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes stated in 1922 in a Supreme Court case that the general rule is at least while the property may be regulated to a certain extent, if regulation goes too far, it will be recognized as a taking. And of course, the big issue is, when is it too far? This statement was reaffirmed in 1987 in another Supreme Court case where the court held that if a property owner proves his property has been taken by land use regulation, the property owner may collect monetary damages to compensate for the taking. And the key issue is always, when has a regulation gone too far so that the city would be exposed to liability? Now let's look back at the history of Fayetteville a little bit. Prior to Fayetteville's first zoning in 1951, property owners could use their property basically as they chose. The 1951 zoning placed many new restrictions on how the property could be used, but no constitutional takings challenges were made to my knowledge. And again in 1970, the Fayetteville City Council reconsidered the zoning throughout Fayetteville and made significant zoning changes without the agreement of affected property owners. Some downzone property owners attempted to regain their previous zonings politically, but no constitutional takings challenges in court were made to my knowledge. No suit with forthcoming when residential density in floodplains was reduced by the City Council by an ordinance in the 1990s from 4 or more houses per acre to 1 house per acre. That was also in requirements by the EPA that said we had to protect our floodplains. In another Supreme Court case in 1980, a zoning ordinance limited development on a 5-acre parcel to 5 houses, and the Supreme Court held that the application of a general zoning law to particular property affects a taking if the ordinance does not substantially advance legitimate state interests or denies an owner economical viable use of his land. The Supreme Court said that the zoning that had limited it to 1 house per acre was not a constitutional taking. We've had other constitutional taking cases decided by the Arkansas Supreme Court. In one, a case involving requiring pollution control costs estimated between $500,000 and $1 million, Arkansas Supreme Court rejected a takings claim, holding that the company has not shown compliance with the regulation would be commensurate with the taking of its property. And they quoted in that particular case, a Supreme Court case, where it says, the mere fact that a partial use of one's property is burdened by regulation does not amount to a taking. The court said in a Supreme Court case in 1962 that there is no set formula to determine where regulation ends and taking begins. Although a comparison of value before and after is relevant, it is by no means conclusive. And they cited another case where a diminution in value from $800,000 to $60,000 was upheld as not a taking. The most recent holding by the United States Supreme Court in this area was in the Lake Tahoe development moratorium case, which was decided in 2002. The Supreme Court held that the years-long moratorium on development of private land within the Lake Tahoe Basin, while the Regional Planning Commission formulated development restrictions to protect Lake Tahoe from degradation, did not constitute a constitutional taking requiring compensation. The Supreme Court held that a government regulation that bans certain private uses on a portion of an owner's property does not constitute a categorical taking, and thus a Penn Central analysis would be necessary to determine the likelihood of a takings claim to be successful for the streamside protection ordinance. That's a 3-part test. And the first part would be whether or not there is interference or reduction with the owner's reasonable investment-backed expectations of how the property could be used. Now, the streamside protection ordinance does not affect any ongoing activity or any existing building on the property. Everything's grandfathered in. Like all of our zoning ordinances and development ordinances, the streamside protection ordinance could have some effect on new development within the streamside protection zones. However, a landowner or investor whose property could be affected can obtain a building permit before this ordinance is effective, and thus accomplish any reasonable investment-based expectations of how the property could be used in the near future. Secondly, you're supposed to consider the economic impact of the regulation upon the property's value. The various procedures within this ordinance with appeal rights to the City Council should prevent the regulation from having enough adverse economic impact on any property owner's parcel to constitute a taking. If and when a variance appeal reaches the City Council, you will need to closely analyze any proven economic hardship upon the landowner resulting from the Streamside Protection Ordinance in your decision to grant or deny such variance. And this should protect the city from a constitutional takings claim. And the third prong is the character and importance of the government interest in the regulation. The Lake Tahoe case by the Supreme Court, which was decided against the landowner developers, related to the same water quality issues that the Streamside Protection Ordinance is designed to protect. The Arkansas Supreme Court has interpreted state law to provide power for the City Council to protect the comfort and well-being of its citizens by furnishing them pure and clean water. The Beaver Water District has requested this Streamside Protection Ordinance from Fayetteville to help preserve the quality and purity of our Beaver Lake water supply. It would be hard to envision a stronger governmental interest than the preservation of clean and pure water supply for our citizens, businesses, and industries. In conclusion, I think the City Council has clear statutory authority to enact the Streamside Protection Ordinance, and I believe that the reasonable regulations, exemptions, and variances within this ordinance should prevent it from being a constitutionally taking of anybody's property.
Thank you, Kevin. What questions do we have for Kevin?
I just got a comment, Mayor. I understand, but you have to give us your best research and hang your hat on that. I just note that on page 3 it says, this court long ago recognized that the varied uses and conflicts of city life required that much to be left to the discretion of the city authorities. These actions should not be judicially interfered with unless manifestly unreasonable and oppressive and unwarranted invasion of private rights. I can see where it depends upon whose ox is getting gored, if they want to bring attention, if they want to try to bring some action. So you led into it by saying this Streamside Protection Ordinance wasn't going to economically, interfere with anything, if things were grandfathered. But I would still say I think it depends on whose ox is getting gored. I hope we never get to that point, because I think that this is something that there's been a great amount of education that have already gone out to the citizens of this town. We're the most educated populace in this state. So hopefully we can find a compromise on this thing. Thank you.
Okay. What else? Anybody? Any questions for Ken on this? Anybody else y'all want to hear from? You want to hear from? Okay.
Do we want to make this amendment and have a discussion on that, or wait
Yeah,
till after?
I mean, what I want the public to understand is if you make public comments, we're going to stay within the confines of this amendment.
Mayor,
Yes. Do you want to wait till after?
I would suggest that we wait about the amendment, because this always is a little confusing to the public, and I think we're all pretty much on board on the amendments, and we can make them maybe after we have the public discussion, and then everyone will have a chance to express themselves.
Penny, you would have to.
I think that the public also already has heard the proposed amendment, so they could probably speak to the amendment at the same time they speak to the whole ordinance, and that way they could have one public comment and then bring it back to you all to make the amendments if you want to.
Good.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry, Brenda. You have one question?
I have one more suggestion, that whenever we receive public comment, I would like that you request that only citizens of Fayetteville speak until they get through, then we can hear from people from the county. But, I think there was some concerns from the public that the citizens, I think of Fayetteville that are directly impacted by this should have the opportunity to speak first. Then, after they've all spoken, then the people from the county can speak.
That would be a change from how
Yeah.
we've ever run a meeting in this council before.
No, I don't think
Yes.
so. No, during the, I thought during the racetrack issue.
Well, I personally, I can't remember ever seeing a sitting mayor decide who's going to speak and what order they're going to speak in. We've always just let the public speak wherever they come from.
Welcome change.
Yeah, I think it'd be a welcome change, but
I
if you
think
don't
that
want to do
if
it,
you-
that's fine.
If you all want to do that, I would certainly, if you want to make a motion in a second.
Can I make a
vote on
comment
it,
first, Mayor?
You sure can.
I remember that we, just a while back, and Mr. Williams remembers this very good because we're in circuit court, the second time in the 8th Circuit Court, over the Rogers thing, that there were a lot of people that lived right outside the city limits that spoke on that, and we didn't, we might have asked where they asked them to identify, because I did ask that for them to identify, but I
We
think
didn't put
that's a
them in order.
bad precedent, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Okay.
I give.
Now, let's see, are we ready for public comment? Okay, here's the rules for everybody. We're all going to stay very strictly within the confines of the rules. Everybody gets one turn at the microphone. You can speak on the amendment, or a lot of, I know there's going to be issues about property rights. You can talk about that. You can talk about if you support it or not. But you get one turn at the microphone unless an alderman brings you back. Some things I won't tolerate. I want you to know this right up front. I won't tolerate any kind of rude behavior. Do not engage an alderman.
Yes.
Do not engage the staff. Staff works for me. There's nothing that comes to this council that does not clear my desk first. You direct your comments to this chair. And I would also ask that the council be courteous to the public as well and to each other. So, now we're going to stay very strictly within the confines of that rule. If anybody gets into one of those tantrums, I'm going to ask you to settle down. If you don't settle down, then I will take other action. I want that to be perfectly clear here tonight. So now that everybody's heard that, who will be first? Wayne?
Mayor Jordan and members of the City Council. My name is Colleen Gaston. I'm the staff attorney for Beaver Water District, and I wasn't planning on being first, but since someone mentioned that I was here and that I would be talking, I thought I would go ahead and start things off, because what I'd like to do is try to address some misconceptions that I've heard or that other folks at Beaver Water District have heard about the ordinance. And you already know that Beaver Water District supports this ordinance. At the last City Council meeting, Bob Morgan, our environmental manager, spoke about the scientific basis for supporting any type of streamside ordinance. And I will, this is one of my first points I'd like to make, is we are not wedded to this particular ordinance. This is not our ordinance. But these types of requirements in general undoubtedly will have a positive effect on water quality. And so that's one thing that I'd like to say. Mr. Williams said that Beaver Water District requested the streamside ordinance. That's not quite correct. We have an agreement that we entered into in 2006 with the city for the protection of the Beaver Lake watershed. That did not require the city to attempt to enact a streamside ordinance. It just required the city to engage in a nutrient reduction program and non-point source reduction program. One of the examples of things that could be done in that program was a streamside ordinance, but we didn't require it. We haven't been involved in the drafting of this ordinance, although again, we certainly support it. What we have done is, when asked, provided technical advice and support. In reference to this 2006 agreement, which some of you may be very familiar with, others maybe not so, but this was an agreement that came up at the time of the last renewal of the city's wastewater discharge permit for the Nolan, the east side plant, which discharges into the White River, which, as you know, goes into Beaver Lake. At that time, ADQ and EPA said that the phosphorus limit in the permit would be reduced from 1 milligrams per liter to 0.5 milligrams per liter for phosphorus. The city came to us. We didn't come to the city. The city came to us and asked if we would work with them and ADQ to come up with an alternative, and actually a rather novel alternative in the state of Arkansas, which was to sort of trade off the point source phosphorus for reduction of non-point source phosphorus. And we said, actually, my legal advice at the time was, no, we've got a guarantee reduction in phosphorus from the point source from 1 to 0.5. We don't know exactly what we're going to get in terms of a non-point source reduction program. But it was a good idea. It really is. It's an innovative approach to things, and one that we think, as time goes along, other cities will want to model. So this agreement was entered into. As a result, the city has saved significant costs in treatment for phosphorus at the Nolan wastewater treatment plant, operation, maintenance, chemicals, and so forth. I also believe that the fact that the city has engaged in this program for about the last 5 years will be useful, very useful to the city in future negotiations on permits, not just with the east side plant, but also on the west side plant. Because as you all are probably well aware, EPA and DQ are ratcheting down further on the phosphorus limits in northwest Arkansas. And I do think that they will be receptive, and I don't know, what exactly that means in terms of a number, but that they will be receptive to the fact that Fayetteville has had this program going on for 5 years, and if you pass an ordinance like this, I think that's a further reason that ADQ and EPA will say, yes, they're serious about non-point source reduction, and yes, maybe we can not require them to go quite as far down on their phosphorus limits at the treatment plants. As Mr. Williams said, the ordinance only applies to land and surface water within the city limits. About half the city, though, drains into the Beaver Lake watershed. And the city of Fayetteville is the single largest urban area in the Beaver Lake watershed. So any runoff from Fayetteville obviously is going to have a significant impact on the lake. But this ordinance covers the city and it covers the Illinois watershed as well. So anything that's done under the ordinance is not going to just benefit Beaver Lake. It's going to benefit the Illinois River watershed and also just the streams in the city. Okay, one thing that we've heard is, why do we need the ordinance? The water quality in the lake is good and getting better. Well, the quality of the lake, of the water in the lake is good, but there are areas of concern. The concentrations of phosphorus in the lake, in the upper layers of the lake, have continued to decline. And that started only when Fayetteville in 1988 was given a phosphorus limit of 1 milligram per liter in its wastewater permit. Since then, the levels have declined in the upper layers. The lower layers of the lake actually are staying pretty steady, so we're not seeing a decrease there. More problematical is that the concentrations of total organic carbon are rising, at least as measured at our intake. And total organic carbon is a precursor for disinfection byproducts. And this is these are parameters that are regulated under the Safe Drinking Water Act. And if you have questions about disinfection byproducts, Bob Morgan's here and he could give you a lengthy dissertation, but I won't take the time to do that tonight, other than to say the water that leaves Beaver Water District has to meet a limit of 0.03 NTUs, and NTU is a nephelometric turbidity unit. That's how it's measured. So the limit when it leaves Beaver Water District has to meet 0.03. The trend is increasing on total organic carbon, as I said, and so because of this, Beaver Water District has engaged a consultant to design and ultimately we will be constructing additional or different types of disinfection facilities. And actually, I'm sorry, I got distracted here. I was talking about total organic carbon, and then I started talking about turbidity. So back on total organic carbon, the message is just that the trend is increasing. Total organic carbon is a precursor for disinfection byproducts. There are numerical limits on those. They become more stringent in 2012. And right now, we're looking as if we and the cities are also subject to those limits, the DBP limits. So we are having to design and install alternative disinfection facilities at Beaver Water District in order to meet the DBP limits. The more TOC increases, the harder it is for us to meet the DBP limits, basically. Okay, now where I got confused was jumping to turbidity, which is also not so much increasing on average, but we're seeing a significant increase in high turbidity events. And I think if Jeremy's not here, well, there's a slide, but since 1977, we've been taking daily turbidity measurements at our intake. And what you can see from this graph, and I'm sorry that no one else can see it, but you can see that there's been a significant increase in the last 10 years in the number of high turbidity events. So this is when I was saying that the limit was the drinking water leaves our plant is 0.03. That's for turbidity. You can see that in the last 10 years, turbidity at the Beaver Water District intake has exceeded 250 NTUs 23 times, including one time over 500 NTUs. But prior to that, there had only been 2 occasions in which the turbidity levels exceeded 250 at our intake. Again, when the limit, when the water leaves our plant is 0.03, you can see we have to work to get that down when we have those high events. I'd also like to mention that, okay, did you? So here are the measurements.
Could you explain what that is?
NTU?
Yeah, or the turbidity.
Turbidity is sediment, essentially. I think is that
Sediment.
particles.
Okay, for us people that don't know this.
Mud running in, it's dirty, turbidity.
Sediment primarily. Hot clear, right.
Mr. Morgan, come on up. Let's not turn this all into a circus here tonight.
Bob Morgan, Beaver Water District. The turbidity is actually a measure of the clarity of the water, or actually the cloudiness of the water.
Okay.
And it's a relationship between the amount of algae, the amount of suspended particles in the water.
Quick question, Mayor.
Yep.
After a big rainstorm and you got mud coming down the river and it goes to the lake, you can see it spread going towards the turbidity changes with the particulate, the load that's carried in there, correct, the sediment?
Yes, sir. You'll see the turbidity will start settling out as it comes into the lake.
So if it's, the clearness is what most people would think about when they, the clarity of the water, how clear it was, the turbidity.
Well, actually the inverse of clarity.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you, Bob.
That's just a lot simpler, saying muddy water ain't too big to debate.
The next slide, if we can go to it, is this pie chart that you have in front of you.
Pull your mic down.
Bob is a little taller than me.
He's a little taller.
In 2009, the Northwest Arkansas Council had produced a Beaver Lake watershed protection strategy. And that document shows that there will be significant future increases in sediment and phosphorus loading to Beaver Lake if no further protective actions are taken. And it's estimated that the future annual sediment load will increase 21% from 2006 to 2005. It's estimated that stream channel erosion will contribute 60% of the sediment load to Beaver Lake. And the largest increase in sediment loading by land use category is expected to come from land developed as low-density residential tracts. And what this pie chart shows, and this is from the Northwest Arkansas Council's report, and it's not surprising, is that you're going to have an increase, a significant increase in low-density residential development from 2001 to 2055. For phosphorus, the future annual phosphorus loading is estimated to increase 14% from 2006 to 2055, and again, low-density development is predicted to yield the greatest relative increase in phosphorus. Another misconception is that we can do this without having any regulation. We can reduce phosphorus, we can reduce sediment without any regulation. And I would argue that the decrease in phosphorus concentrations that we've seen in the lake so far are directly attributable to environmental regulation. As I said earlier, it was not until the phosphorus limits went into the wastewater treatment plant permit that phosphorus began to decline in the lake. And for non-point source pollution, we've had years of voluntary measures to try to reduce non-point source pollution, but in 2006, the Arkansas legislature declared both the Beaver and the Illinois River watersheds as nutrient surplus areas. That was, our legislature made that declaration and then directed the Arkansas Natural Resources Commission to enact nutrient management regulations, and those apply to the soil application of poultry litter and commercial fertilizer and other soil nutrients to the land. So these, we haven't seen decreases until we've had some measure of regulation. Finally, we've heard that this ordinance is just duplicative of existing environmental regulations, and it's not. Environmental law is my field. ADQ, EPA, the Corps of Engineers do regulate primarily point source discharges to streams. ANRC does, as I just mentioned, regulate soil application of nutrients. You do have your flood provisions, FEMA flood provisions, and so forth, but none of these laws designate or regulate activities within a streamside zone. So this is not duplicative, and as you've heard from your staff and others, the science shows that this will produce benefits. Thank you very much.
Quick question. Yeah, I understand Fayetteville has a great watershed that goes into that, but isn't Fayetteville the largest purchaser of water from the Beaver Water District?
Well, I would guess so, just because of the population, but I've
read they are.
I would assume so.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm Nancy Varvel, and I'm a resident of Fayetteville. I own a house at 1824 Pinecone that backs up to Hamstring Creek on the west side of I-540.
So you're next to the stream, right, Nancy?
The house is.
Very good, very good.
The area along the stream is wooded.
Yeah.
But the stream itself is a tangled mass of washed out trees and jagged banks of dirt and rocks. The area is decorated with plastic bags and fast food containers and all sorts of other debris that has washed down from farther upstream. When it rains, the streams come up much higher and rearranges the shoreline, removing sediment and plants as it goes. That sediment obviously goes on down the stream to be dumped along someone else's stream bank, and if not, into the Illinois River, the one that we're spending so much money trying to clean up. I bought that house in 1999, and it sits on a pie-shaped lot. And when I bought the house, the bank had me go to extra lengths to establish that the house was not in a floodplain. And it turns out the house wasn't in a floodplain at that time, but that the whole backyard is. A couple of years ago, I received another letter indicating that the house might now be in a floodplain, and I haven't followed up on that letter because I dread hearing the answer. Increased fluctuations in the depth of that stream due to due to less protection of its banks farther upstream may have or have the potential to have my house designated as being in a floodplain. And if that turns out to be the case, then the property would be more difficult to sell and obviously less valuable. If the sides of the stream upstream from my house were better protected, the stream would flow more predictably and moderately. So I don't see this proposed ordinance as a new invasion of property owner rights. I see it as similar to an ordinance that I already live under. I live on the south side of Mount Sequoia, which is in the Hillside Hilltop Overlay District. And there I have to abide by certain rules that other residents in town don't have to, so that our tree canopy there is maintained. And the runoff from my land won't adversely affect the quality of water running into the city's storm drains. I accept this legal oversight as necessary to maintain the health of our mountainside environment and the values of our properties there. I think the streamside protection ordinance will do the same for properties along Fayetteville streams. Fayetteville isn't a special place only a special place because of its people. It's special because of its natural environment. So I urge you to adopt the streamside protection ordinance to protect that environment, and especially the properties along the streams.
Thank you.
I'm Jim Lobler, and I live within 5 miles of Fayetteville. And that to me is a scary thought. I heard that from somebody else when I was talking about moving out of Fayetteville. So, and it kind of limited me. So, I'm going to point fingers because I don't know people's names. The gal in the black.
You keep your comments to the chair, Mr.
No, this isn't. I'm not going to say anything derogatory about anybody. What? Well, yeah. Okay. Everybody on this council that is speaking on your behalf or works at a water plant is telling you nothing but this is it. It's positive. You got to do it. It's great. There ain't nothing wrong with it. Okay. I deal with stocks every day. That's what I do. I'm an investment advisor. Okay. If I sit here and tell you that I've never had a loss, then I'm a liar. And if somebody can't tell you the other side of the story, this is supposed to be a government debate, but I don't see it. The only person that's debating seems to be the people out here. I think a lot of the fear that comes from this was well stated in an email I got today. I'll keep out all the rude comments and kind of stick to the names. But a Tea Party, I guess, in this area, I don't know the people, they said they'll oppose officials who promote or vote for Agenda 21, sustainable development, smart growth, the International Council of Local Environment Initiatives, which has now renamed itself to get international out of it. It is called Local Governments for Sustainability, which this city is signed onto and is a member of and has pledged their support to. Okay. All of these are code words for one person's way of saying this is the way we ought to live. But America, if you look at our Constitution, it is so small and that everything is just about tort law that goes through the courts. And things that courts say change all the time. Right now, we got people that are so scared they're trying to get it where everybody can carry a gun on their hip. You know, as a weapons expert, that scares me. As somebody who believes the Constitution is the first law that I pledged my life to, I can't fight it, okay? And it's going to have its problems, but I can't fight it. It's in our Constitution. And it was to keep us from having to hold off despots who want to take over our lives and tell us how to live. Now, I think this is a red herring the way it's written. You're talking about nutrients, runoff, on one hand. Then on the other hand, you're talking about erosion. The two really don't have anything to do with anything. You aren't going to convince me that 300 houses in this city are causing a massive problem in the lake. Sure, they add to it. But my neighborhood is within, I'm the furthest away, about 400 yards from our creek, okay? My neighborhood is just pumping and pumping, you know, all the fertilizers and everything else, and the dog stuff, and, you know, it's going in the water. You aren't going to tell me that 300 people are going to be going to put a significantly more amount of nutrients than a total population together of Fayetteville. On the streamside erosion, you need to decide whose responsibility is it, or is there even a responsibility? There's three answers. It's either the responsibility of the homeowner to maintain his land, it's a responsibility of the city to maintain the waterways, or Mother Nature takes over it and she would have made it break out anyway. The only thing we did wrong is we built this huge lake, and now Mother Nature can't handle human beings. And the biggest offender, Mother Nature now can't handle cows. We're finding out that the cows are doing it worse than we are. And that goes for methane, not just the nutrients over here. It really bothers me that some of the people that are going to be voting on this are members or supporters of international organizations. The same people who took an oath to the United States to protect, defend the U.S. Constitution, the state constitution, and work for the will of the people that they represent. And I'm going to tell you what, 15% of people voting isn't the will of everybody. I believe that a city needs to put down ordinance and be reasonable. But when the city starts talking about taking away land and controlling land that people invested for a purpose, like the last gal who came up here, she wants to see this beautiful river. She's doing it right. Maybe we got a few that are doing it wrong, but I'll bet you most people bought on the river because they wanted to enjoy the river. Now they got to worry about snakes, rats. You know, is this going to be like Europe in the 1300s? We're going to have rats crawling up on the yard where your children are. There's going to be snakes. There's going to be skunks with rabies. You know, the lot was made for a human being to live on. Now, if you can tell them a better way to do it, by golly, go out there and do it. You're wasting so much time in here fighting people like me. You know, just go out there and tell them this is the way you can do it, and I'll bet you they'll go along with you. But this country is founded on the individual rights, and this thing, and I swear, anybody who's going to put an ICLEI, ICLEI.org, putting this city behind them before the Constitution and our people needs to walk away. You just need to walk away. If you can't handle it, walk away. God, build a village upstream and do it the way you want to. But don't make us change. So I would, in summation, I would really be worried about people coming to you with glowing answers and 100% support because they have not looked into what that mercury in the light bulb is going to do. They aren't looking into all those other things I told you about, all these supposedly environmental causes and changes in our life that turned out to be worse for us. It just took a little time for us to learn. I don't think you need to jump this hard, and you need to make it real clear nobody's going to build a bike path across. You need to write it in there. I ask you to do it tonight with all your other changes. Write it in there that this government will not tolerate any invasion of your property by bicycle parks or anything else that doesn't have to do with the health and welfare of the people of the city and people 5 miles out. Those people 5 miles out better start getting in here and talking their mind. That's where I stand, and I'm asking for an honor to come here and consider what your oaths are.
Thank you. Who would be next? If y'all can queue up that wants to speak, that would really be.
Mr. Mayor, my name is Kevin Babin. I live in Ward 2 on the Neocasa Creek on Elm Street. I'd like to bring up a couple points, and I'm not trying to, once again, point at any fingers at any staff or anything. I'm just clarifying what was said. On February 3rd, I brought up the point that phosphates were being removed from dishwashing detergent, and that was clarified today, but my point that I wanted to bring up was the removal of phosphates actually considered as, are we going to study that removal as a total phosphorus load being taken off of the waste coming out of our sewer plants? Is that even being considered? I'm not trying to clarify that the law was made. What are we doing to figure out if that's going to help our situation with total phosphorus load? And also, is that removal of phosphates from dishwashing detergent going to confuse the results of this proposal of this ordinance? So I want to make sure that we have a clear understanding of what changes were made in July 2010 on that issue, and make sure we're following up on that and not getting false positives on this ordinance. The next thing I'd like to address was it seems to me that I personally said, my property does not put a bunch of water into the creek, and I'm sure there are different properties that do. And it was stated today at one of the answers that this ordinance isn't meant to deal with the flow of water off the property, but then you're also talking about that the reason a trail is allowed because water can't speed up when it flows off the property. So I'm a little confused there. And then also that 12 feet times 100 I thought was 1,200 square feet, not 120 square feet, unless I'm misunderstanding my math. So, and it's parallel to the stream, so if the water's moving parallel, going with the stream, that trail is not going to slow down any water flow at all. So it's going to actually be a negative. And I actually ride the trails and appreciate them. I'm just trying to point out that the trail part of this isn't really in the spirit of what this ordinance is trying to do. Okay? The next issue I have is that and I don't want to say we've picked and choose our science to make this ordinance, but we did make some assumptions. Some of the presentations we've seen saying that if you go up to 300 feet away from a creek, you're going to get 100% of the nutrients that flow off that property. No sediment, no problems at all. Well, we've picked 50 feet because that seemed to be a good balance to get the number of nutrients versus the amount of property we're going to try to regulate. Well, 50 feet to one person is not a big deal. 50 feet in my particular case is my entire backyard. So yes, I do see this as a take, and I understand that some people have their professional opinion that it's not a take, and I understand that you have to go by that guidance. Well, I did some reading on your proposals, and I think you approached your city planners and asked them to find out what the cost to the city would be on this ordinance, and I think the result was there's no cost at all. Well, I don't understand how there can be no cost to the city and not have someone lose value or have a cost somewhere else. There seems to be a balanced scale that's not being evaluated here. I know that it's really hard to say that, and if I can understand it correctly, your staff was quoted in the paper saying that the assumption that, and I may misquote this, so please, the assumption that property value loss is a little bit tenuous because there was no study done on, loss of value due to ordinances. Well, if that's the case, why didn't we do a study? Why aren't we looking at that? You did studies to prove it wouldn't cost you anything. Why aren't we looking at what it's going to actually cost the 1,300 or so property owners? These are the questions that I'm asking to slow down for and step back and look at this proposal. Do we really need, do we truly need 50 feet in every situation? Do we really need the best practice manual to be something that can be changed? I mean, I know that that's something that you're trying to make so it's administratively to be able to keep up with the times, like was mentioned earlier, but that really scares people, the fact that they have to approach you for change after the change has been made. They like to see things in black and white, and right now the black and white that they're reading doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. That's why there's a lot of concern, in my opinion, on this ordinance. I'm asking again, please slow down, please review this again, and think about what you're doing. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Angie Albright, and I'm a resident of Ward 1 here in Fayetteville, and I am here tonight as a representative of the Environmental Action Committee. We are a city subcommittee appointed by all of you to look at environmental matters and to think about the quality of life for Fayetteville in terms of its natural environment. We've been watching the development of this ordinance. We did some of the research. I myself did some of the research on this to support the city staff in their development of this ordinance. And I am here to say on behalf of the committee that we wholeheartedly support this. We've worked on this for many months, and we've looked at drafts of it. We've looked at other city ordinances. We've looked at the science. We wholeheartedly support this. You appointed me as an average person, a Fayetteville citizen who cares about Fayetteville, to look into this. I'm not a scientist. My specialties are elsewhere. But I can read the research, and I can look at what other cities are doing and understand clearly that this streamside protection ordinance is good for our city and it's good for the Fayetteville citizens. I would congratulate the city staff on this remarkably reasonable, moderate ordinance that does address both the rights of the property owners and the best practices in streamside protection for the preservation of or the restoration of water quality as well as the beautification of our city. Is this ordinance a property rights issue? I actually think it is, but we're naive if we think that our property rights exist in a vacuum. What you do on your property absolutely affects what happens on mine, and we only have to look back to our years of struggle over the sound ordinance to think about how true that is. What you're doing over there on your property when your music is too loud affects my quality of life, and it's not different when we talk about water quality or chemicals or the way we maintain our properties. So I would ask you to think about not just individual property owners. I mean, how in the world could we possibly decide whose property rights trump whose? We can't. So therefore, I think you have to think about this ordinance in terms of what's best for everyone. And if one person is allowed to do whatever he wants on his property, my pursuit of happiness, according to the Constitution, is compromised. And I think that when we look at these things, we have to think of whose rights we're looking at, and I think that's the entire city. So I would urge you on behalf of the committee and on behalf of myself as an interested citizen to support this ordinance. Thanks.
Good evening. My name is Amy Robinson, and I'm here speaking on behalf of myself and my family, my husband Brent, and our 3 children. We are members of Ward 4. Robert and Justin. Welcome, Justin, by the way. And we are here to ask you to support the ordinance. And I have to step back a little bit. We moved to Fayetteville with 2 children at the time in 2003. And for the purposes of this story, I have to say something that I'm a little embarrassed to admit. We did not move here with the intention of staying. When we moved here, it was easy to notice the beautiful scenery and the wonderful feel that the city had. But something else stood out. And again, I'm going back, 2003, a myriad of signs in people's yards saying, "Smoke-free Fayetteville." Does anybody remember this moment in time?
Oh, yeah.
We watched with great interest as the community voiced its opinions and debated and weighed the pros and cons of this debate. And as you know, it's easy to fall in love with Fayetteville. The people, the culture, the opportunities, and the energy are hard to miss and very infectious. So it didn't take us long to realize that this was a wonderful place to be, a wonderful place to raise our family. And as we considered and discussed the possibilities, I remember one day in the car a very specific conversation that we had, that the only thing that would tear us away from staying here is if the smoke-free didn't pass. Although we understood the fear of the opposing position, we had seen and lived the benefits of smoke-free communities. The decision of the community of whom we wanted to be a part, but had only been a part for a short period of time, would be sending a kind of message to us of what we were willing to do for the health and future of the community as a whole. So, we're still here 8 years later, so I guess you know how the smoke-free ordinance turned out. We've since become deeply involved in the community, and we're proud to be part of the fabric that makes it unique. Fayetteville is a community of compassion, innovation, and forethought, and to Karen's point, proactive. The combination of our art culture, the university, and the steps we've taken as a community toward future planning and sustainability have brought us to the top of the list of best places to live in the country for multiple years. And because the message that we send is, we care. The Streamside Ordinance is another, if you'll excuse the phrase, Fayetteville watershed moment. Sorry about that. We have an opportunity to make another stand and continue sending the message that we are a community that cares for our people, our environment, and our economic health. The ordinance is an economically beneficial opportunity that reduces pollutants and is a less expensive way to protect our drinking water and our recreational areas. If we do not take these steps now, we will pay for them exponentially later through the health and the economic deficits that we will incur, including the reduction of recreational use, increased cleanup cost and restoration, and loss of property value as well as land itself. Now imagine, if you will, that there is someone or many someones out there today who haven't been here very long. And like we were 8 years ago, they are making their decision about the community that they want to live in and the place where they want to raise their children. And they are basing it on this decision and the message that it sends about our willingness to do not what is easy, but what is best now and for our future. So I ask you, will they stay or will they go? We, my family and I, believe in this council's ability to guide our city, and we can to continue sending the message that we care for our community and the people who live here. We thank you all for everything that you do, and we appreciate your support of the Streamside Ordinance.
Thank you.
Honorable Mayor, Council, my name's Lee Owen. I don't represent anyone but me. And I grew up in Northwest Arkansas. My career was in law enforcement. My career took me away from here for a few years. Had an opportunity to come back in 1978. I opened up the first federal probation parole office here in the federal building here in Fayetteville. I could have made my residence in any town around here, but I chose Fayetteville. Fayetteville's a good place to live. It's a good place to raise a family, and I've raised my family here. I purchased, at that time, 11 acres on Old Wire Road. I live at 3105 North Old Wire Road. My property lies at the northeast corner of Old Wire and 265 Highway, or crossover. You have two creeks out there, one on each side of crossover. The one that comes through my property goes almost the full length of my property, which is about 1/5 of a mile. And with a 50-foot buffer on each side of that, it's going to put restrictions on a little over 2 acres. I disagree with your ordinance. I respectfully disagree with it. I'm not here to spread dissatisfaction or try to take up all your time with a bunch of words that really doesn't amount to anything. I think that sometimes Fayetteville has been too quick to try to fix something with an ordinance. Sometimes you've made some mistakes. Some of them have been successful. But I'm just going to ask you to do this. I don't know how many, what the ratio is of property owners that has a creek that runs through their property against the, I'm sure that there's a lot more residents and voters here that has property that doesn't have a creek that goes through it. And that could probably care less. And it'd be easy to look at that and say, well, that sounds like a great idea. I'm for it. Would you be for it if that creek ran through your property? So it's obvious this ordinance is going to eventually come to a vote. So I want to ask you to do a couple of things when you get ready to vote on it. If this was affecting your property, would you still vote for it? Would that be the reason? Would you still go ahead and do it? Are you trying to pass an ordinance to represent the people that elected you? Or are you trying to satisfy some, if you'll excuse my expression, Al Gore wannabe that's trying to make a name for himself? So think about that when you vote. If it affected you directly, would you go ahead and do it? And I'm asking you not to do it if you're representing me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Terry Michaels. I recently have become a property owner on...
Pull the mic down just a little bit.
Is that better?
That's better.
On Willow Street, Tin Cup, well, it used to be called Tin Cup. It's called Spout Spring now, borders the back of my property. I have plans to develop the property, and I am fully supportive of this ordinance and very proud that the city is even considering it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Bill Moeller. I'm a resident of the city, Ward 4, and I'm in support. I stand for this ordinance. I think it's needed. I think there's good, solid science which is pointing to that need, and I think the city staff has done an extraordinary job of researching the situation, developing a best practices manual, and drafting an ordinance. There are many reasons that I support this, but I want to focus on two. And one of those is property rights. And the other is government regulation. Now, with regard to property rights, I understand that owners of property have certain rights, but I'd like to remind all of you that all of the rest of us have rights also. Now, that's a very important thing for me. I have a right to clean, uncontaminated water. The people who are downstream of any given property have a right not to have their land washed away because the guy upstream did not take proper measures to prevent that. There are people other than the individual property owner who have rights. I think that's very important. Now, with regard to government regulation, I've lived in a number of towns, a number of cities in this country. I have seen what happens when there is not government regulation. The Schuylkill River in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, is the water source for much of the city. The water that comes from that water department is referred to as Schuylkill Punch. and it is not a nice reference. I have visited many times Washington, D.C. during the period when there was sewage in the Potomac River. That was due to a lack of government regulation. I have lived in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, and I have seen the Caney River carrying with it the sediment from all of the ranches and all of the farms upstream of Bartlesville. That was due to a lack of government regulation. Now, I got a war story for you. This is more amusing than it is relevant. One of the things I saw here this evening, and caught a glimpse of it, was a photograph of some erosion on a local stream. Bisbee, Arizona, the Rio Grande River. In the town plaza in Bisbee, I visited with a bunch of Mexican Americans who were Mexican American because the Rio Grande changed course due to erosion. They had been Mexican before. Now suddenly their property was in the United States, and they were United States citizens. Now, who lost out? Mexico lost out. But when we have uncontrolled erosion, one of the effects can be that somebody loses his property. Somebody else may gain, or it may just widen the stream bed. But people lose. And I think you need to consider the rights of that person who might lose. So I encourage you, please vote for this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, City Council, my name is Hallie Hoggett. I'm not really sure how relevant my comments are going to be tonight because I've been under the impression since I spoke with the Planning Commission and following this all along that this whole debate has been about phosphorus, not about flood control, not about, I believe we heard carbons from the Beaver Lake Water District today. So I'm going to just stick with the phosphorus, and if the topic's not only about phosphorus, then we'll have to have someone else that can speak on that. I have a property, obviously, that would be affected by this, and in trying to convince myself what the right thing to do, whether to give up this property for the better of Fayetteville, I felt the first place to start was to try to do a little research myself and try to convince myself that this was indeed going to make a substantial impact. Well, I started with the 200-page report that we had from Geosyntec. I don't know if you've all had a chance to read that. It's 200 pages of really great reading, but I think it's important that you do attempt to read through it. In my reading through it, I did find a few things that caught my attention. I'm not going to obviously read the entire report to you, but just to touch on a few things that I found concerning, things like sources of sediment that could contribute was a phrase that was used. Expected loading reduction was estimated was used on another page, and these are just, miscellaneous pages pulled out, not in any particular order. Particles become a potential source of phosphorus that may eventually be released. I think that there was some science put into this, but I think there was a lot of speculation put into that science as well, because I'm not sure that the science is fully there yet. There was even a section in the, excuse me, I've lost my place here, within the report that debates whether or not researchers in Illinois found that while a forest buffer removed more phosphorus initially, the forest buffer also released more phosphorus during the dormant season. So on an annual basis, the grass buffer is more efficient. So even with this own report, it doesn't seem to be clear that the forested buffer versus the grass buffer. Well, if the grass buffer is better, then we're better off to leave things as they are and leave our yards right down to the stream banks. Finally, the purpose of the report in the introduction was an agreement to try to not have to meet the phosphorus output at the wastewater treatment plant. If the wastewater treatment plant's the problem, then the city needs to stand up and take responsibility for their problem. You don't pass down the problems of the Nolan wastewater treatment plant to 1,300 of us. There's 60-some odd thousand people that live and reside in Fayetteville. We all are going to be responsible for taking care of what comes out of that wastewater treatment plant. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I'm Steve Harris. I own a couple of houses on 15th Street. Town Branch splits my property. I have property on both sides of it. I might have a couple of questions. One of the questions that I have is that I have livestock on that property. One section in this paper says that I will be grandfathered in. That's my interpretation of this anyway. But I will be grandfathered in, and I will be able to continue to use that land as I have used it for the last 10 years.
That's what I understand. Is that correct?
Another place in this paper says that there will be, and I probably can't quote it word for word, but anyway, no housing, no grazing allowed within this buffer area, 50-foot buffer area or whatever it may end up being.
Mr. Mayor, what he's referring to, or what that's referring to, is new grazing, new use. If you are currently doing something that's grandfathered in, you can't initiate a new action like that.
That should say new action.
Well, the ordinance is clear when it says that if you are committing or doing some sort of activity, you may continue.
I guess, but anyway, like I said, you can read it either way. If, I can't. But anyway, another question. We'll get on with that. Also, there's a section in there about stream crossings. If we put a tree line buffer both sides of my creek, both sides of that creek, how am I going to access from one side of that creek to the other side of that creek? Y'all going to build me a bridge to get across there?
I think
how am I going to get across there?
Wasn't that in the best practices manual?
Yeah,
it was.
Well, there's a deal in there, but it doesn't really say, because my deal is, I have to have a road across there.
Karen, you have an answer for him on that?
Well, if there's a current crossing, obviously it's grandfathered in. What it states in the ordinance is that stream crossings, including driveways, roadways, trails, or railroads, are allowed when the city engineer determines there is no practical and feasible alternative. And then if it's obviously within the first 25 feet, it would be a stream crossing would fall within that. Then you would have to follow the best management practices manual for that crossing.
Does it say he has to build a crossing, or
that you have to build a crossing? No.
you just have to build it according
If
to?
you were going to build a crossing, then you would follow the best management practices manual.
So my situation is now that I have a dirt crossing going across there, which washes out every time the creek gets up, and I have to take my tractor and build me a new crossing. I'll continue to do that. Is that correct?
I assume that's going to be grandfathered in.
Yes, if he's got a crossing, he can continue to use the crossing. And you can maintain it.
So I'll be allowed to do that. Okay.
If it gets washed away, you can rebuild it, I think, according to, check that out and be sure about that. Karen?
If the crossing were destroyed, then you would need to follow the best management practices manual. That's consistent with all of our other ordinances. If there's a zoning district change, for example, then you would have to comply with the ordinance. What it says, or with the best management practices manual, what it says is that you're going to consider minimize or reduce stream crossings through proper planning. And you're going to minimize the amount of excavation and filling. And then it goes on to tell you the methods that you can use to minimize your stream crossing impacts. So, for example, constructing your stream crossings during periods of low flow, for example. Locate the crossings where stream bed and banks are composed of firm, cohesive soils to minimize erosion. So it gives you a whole list of best management practices that you would utilize.
Next time, if you pass this ordinance, who's going to maintain this buffer that we're putting down through there? It's on my property. I mean,
the city will.
The city is going to plant trees on it.
All right. What do we have on that? I don't think so. I don't think we'll be doing that.
No, we're not maintaining
We're
a
not
buffer.
into the maintaining business.
who's gonna maintain it? Who's gonna keep it?
Mr. Summers, if you're maintaining it now, you'd be allowed to maintain it later on.
So if it fills up with brush, it's still gonna be my responsibility to get it out. Is that what you're telling me?
The city is not trying to take over the creek and try to maintain it. It's only trying to limit certain activities which you're not doing now, which would be degradation to the stream or creek. So if you're doing stuff now to maintain your creek side, then you can continue to do that.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. So when the tree upstream, by golly, washes out of the bank, comes through and tears my fence out, and my cattle and my horses get out on the highway, that's my problem.
Or your neighbor up, or maybe your neighbor upstream. Who has
that's the blunt of this thing is anything that happens on that thing is that I'm still going to be responsible, like only for taking care of it. Is that correct?
Nothing is changing in relation to how you would maintain your stream. But we'll let him go ahead and finish. I think.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Sullivan. I mean, I don't know how to keep repeating that if you're doing whatever you're doing now, you'd be allowed to do. Now, you're not going to be allowed to take a chainsaw down there and saw down trees, from what I understand, but if there's brush and that sort of thing, but.
That's about the only way I can get them suckers out of there when they float down the creek, is cut them up with a chainsaw and take the tractor out of there and pull them out of there.
All right.
You know, because if somebody don't do that, then we're gonna have one heck of a flooding situation. You know, that's just all there is to that deal.
Okay.
Anyway, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine.
I'll get on with that. I'll get on with it. Here.
Okay.
How does the city plan to enforce this ordinance?
I assume the way we enforce any other ordinance.
I mean, are we going to have someone that inspects this thing and says, well, Mr. Harris, you need to do this and this to your property, or are we going to wait till? Are we going to wait till somebody downstream from me complains and says that I got to do something?
Okay. Staff, what answer do we have?
Sure, and it's exactly what we said earlier, that one way of enforcement is through the development review process. So if someone's going to construct something, needs to get a building permit, they're actually going to come through staff review. And in that way, the ordinance would be enforced. And I think the other two ways that were mentioned is, one, most of our ordinances are, in terms of enforcement, are complaint driven. So if we were to get a call, then city staff would go out there. Our first step is always to provide information and to inform them of what needs to be done. And then the third way is that, as our chief of staff mentioned, staff walks all the creeks in the city, I think, on a 5-year cycle. So that's just sort of a visual inspection. But do not anticipate city staff walking through backyards to see how people located their gardens, for example.
Does that answer your question?
Somewhat. But anyway, once the city has planted trees or grass or whatever they decide to do, or however they're going to approach it, my understanding they haven't really made a decision exactly how they're going to do that yet. But once that's done, and then big rain comes on there and washes that stuff out, your $250 or whatever the lineal foot is going to be washed right down the creek toward Beaver Lake. And then are we going to come back in there and do that again? Or are we going to leave it eroded? Because I really have lived on that creek, ladies and gentlemen, for quite a few years. And I have seen some tremendous amounts of water come down that creek. And I am not sure that these engineers, the Beaver Lake Water District, or the city council, or the mayor realizes what we're dealing with the amount of water that comes down through there. I would encourage you, before you pass this ordinance, put on your rubber boots, take your little trip up and down that river, up and down that creek. I have walked that creek between Morningside Drive, South College Avenue, and you're going to be surprised at what you see if you haven't already been down through there. Another problem that this streamside buffer presents to me is everyone that lives on the south side of Fayetteville knows. There is a lot of homeless people that live in those woods down there, camp, live there, however you want to say it. If we put trees and stuff up down through on each side of the creek, that is going to continue to give them a buffer to run right up and down that creek. Those people present a problem to people like me that own property. They climb over my fences, they tear my fences down. It's almost a constant battle for me, fixing fence and what have you. And I don't feel like that I need to give them another avenue to run up and down my property. And like I said, I just don't think I don't think it's a good idea. I'm against it totally, and I urge you, when you vote, to consider this very, very carefully, and I urge you to put on your boots, go look at what you're voting on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Mayor, Councilman, I'm Jerry Patton. Lived here all my life. I've got property in a couple of places in town. You know, I think we all, or most of us, would agree that we'd like to have clean water, and I think property owners would like to maintain their freedom and their liberty and have property rights. I think this ordinance is going a little bit beyond our capabilities as human beings with Mother Nature out there. And some of the studies that I've heard don't carry a lot of conclusive facts. They're estimates, projections. You know, it seems to me that the solution to this, at least for the time being, would let this cool for a few years and see what happens. I think you can take action at any time. I think the standards of the EPA have dramatically changed recently. I think it's caused a lot of cities problems, although the rest of Arkansas hasn't made any ordinance along these lines. You know, we've got great faith in your ability to guide us, and I hope you exercise that vision and wisdom. I believe you're moving way too fast. I believe this is not the time to do this, and I believe it's an extremely complicated issue. As I've been hearing both sides of the issue tonight. It seems like rocket science, and I'm sure it is, but I heard one statement from the Beaver Lake lady that said the water quality is good in Beaver Lake right now. Seems to be getting better. I think that a little educational piece that I got as I walked in the door tonight is an awfully good idea. It's education, it's a workshop. It's informing citizens, property owners, and individuals of responsible activity on their property. I think you take away the force of the people, and I think you're going to wind up in the minority. I think you need to support the force of the people and encourage those people to do the right thing. I'm not sure, you know, I'm not sure the jail's going to hold too many more people. It seems to be full now, and I think more burden on less freedom and less liberty is just a continued problem with the political winds we've got flying around the country right now. And I think in the next few years, I think those are going to change, and I think things are going to clear up and get a whole lot better. So I'm not for it at this time. I'm for clean water, and I'm for property rights. But I don't think this is the right time to do this. I think we need to wait a while. I think we need to settle our problems with our water treatment plants, our sewer plants, and then I think we need to take a fresh look at this at that point. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Listen, all the hand clapping and yelping and carrying on. Let's cut this. All right.
Thank you all. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council. My name is Tom McKinney. I am representing the Arkansas chapter of the Sierra Club here this evening. And our local group, the Ozark Headwaters Group, which has about 200 members that live here in Fayetteville. We've been around since 1892 in the United States. We were founded in Arkansas in 1972 and became our own chapter in 1982. So we have been around for a few years. I'm a native to this part of the state, grew up here in Northwest Arkansas, spent most half my life or more in Fayetteville, and recently live in Westville. Old enough to remember what it was like when we got our water from Lake Sequoia and Lake Fayetteville. It was adequate, but inadequate in many ways, particularly certain times of the year. Having Beaver Lake has been a godsend to this part of the state. Nobody can deny that. But you can't take a lake the size of Beaver Lake and have unlimited development around it and expect the water quality to maintain its integrity. This is why we have the rules and regulations and the laws that we have. We say the same thing for a city. I have watched Devol grow over the years. As a kid and teenager, I ran around a lot of its creeks. And as the city developed, I watched these creeks get blown out because of the impervious structures and parking lots that were built in the city. Watched banks erode, people lose their property, trash accumulate, and I think it's one of the highest functions of a city government to make sure that damage like this is at least slowed down, if not stopped, because it affects everybody. It'll affect our drinking water supply in Beaver Lake, and it affects the quality of life that we have here in Fayetteville. And the Sierra Club has already sent our statements to the City Council in support of this ordinance, and I would encourage y'all to progress the ordinance this evening and ask that no weakening amendments be added to the ordinance. I think the ordinance personally is not as strong as it should be or could be, but I think it's a good start, and I think the city is doing a great service to its citizens and to Northwest Arkansas as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Mayor Jordan and the council. My name is Joanna Pollock, and I'm a citizen of Fayetteville and a property owner. This ordinance protects our drinking water and our recreational areas. And there's a much more economic value in our future when we protect our resources today. Riparian buffer zones are really a common practice to protect water quality and reduce pollution. And these buffer zones are some of the most common conservation and property protection initiatives in the nation, so why shouldn't we have ours right here? Also, having riparian buffer zones keeps property values higher. They also decrease public investment in stormwater management, flood control, even though that's not the intention of the ordinance, and pollution removal. They decrease property damage, and they also reduce land maintenance costs. Many of these buffer zones are 100 to 300 feet, which is really needed in order to protect wildlife habitat. So you see that this 50-foot buffer zone is very conservative and reasonable, and it will protect the stream from erosion and pollution. There's also flexibility in this ordinance to protect property owner rights through variances and ordinances. And waivers. So I just really don't see the problem. This just makes good common sense, and I'm proud that it's something that my council is considering. And I just want to thank you for listening to me also as a citizen of Fayetteville.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Warren Phillips. And I'd like to start off by saying I disagree with the attorney about the fact that it isn't a taking. I believe it is. And, of course, that's neither here nor there because that'll have to be done in a court of law with somebody withstanding. But there were a few other things I'd like to talk about. It's like the one lady that said, well, you know, property rights, if their music's too loud or something, that affects her pursuit of happiness. Well, basically, property rights were put in when we had tyrannical governments. People didn't have property or the pursuit of happiness. So this is something we need to take into consideration before we start infringing on these rights. And now to talk about Beaver Lake. I don't know if you're aware of this, but the water in Beaver Lake has improved over about the last 20 years, year in, year out. We're talking about a lot of development. We're talking about a lot of companies coming in here. We're talking about a lot of industrial things, and the water has improved year in, year out. Now you might say, well, why is that? Well, I kind of think the EDQ, we have the EPA, have tried to clean the water up, and it's been effective. And the one thing that we've had is voluntary people trying to keep it clean. We've had people that have learned, you know, you don't do this, you don't do that with the creek, and it has tended to be cleaner. And as far as the actual problem with the with the streams, is we keep talking about phosphorus. Now, I talked to an engineer of one of the other water suppliers from Beaver Lake, and he said the phosphorus causes the blue-green algae to grow, which gives it a taste problem. It can be easily treated for pennies, and it's not really a problem. And the second part is turbulence. Well, I talked to a geologist about this exact same thing, and he said, you know, it's as simple as this. If you dig a hole and you run water through it, Mother Nature's going to start filling the hole in, and it's going to start bringing in dirt from everywhere. So there's your turbulence. So basically, we're trying to legislate against Mother Nature. Now, if we could do that, I'd suggest a state law that says, hey, we'll stop all the tornadoes at the state line. We'll pass a law that they're not allowed in, because you can't fight Mother Nature. And that is basically what we're looking at with the turbulence. So I would suggest that rather than this ordinance and rather than this encumbrance on property, why don't we do something on a voluntary basis with the threat of your ordinance if it doesn't work out? And take your good practices and talk to the people, see if you can get them into class, see if they'll do it, and let's do it voluntarily. That would be much less onerous to the property owners. And let's face it, how are you going to sell a piece of property when they don't have a backyard? You can't. It's going to devalue a lot of property values. There's a lot of things to consider in this, and I would think it would be much better if you guys could say, hey, let's do it for a year or two, voluntarily, monitor the water, and then if it doesn't work, you still got the ordinance you can always come back to. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor, Council, thank you for the opportunity to talk with you about the importance of this streamside protection ordinance. My name is Leif Kinberg. I live in South Fayetteville along the Town Branch stream. It's a tributary of the White River, and it's one of the streams that will be affected by this ordinance. I feel that this ordinance is very important to the city, our people, and particularly those people who live downstream from our Fayetteville homes and properties. Let me explain why this ordinance will protect the value of Fayetteville properties along streams. In 2005, the 28 acres now referred to as the Hill Street Apartments was cleared for development. In 2008, FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, performed a flood zone evaluation on Town Branch and extended the flood zones out significantly in several areas along Town Branch. In July 2009, I purchased my property, which is coincidentally located on both sides of the Town Branch stream channel. And in October 2009, Town Branch flooded my home, vehicle, and yard. There have been 2 subsequent and serious floods that have required home repairs at my property. Since the first flood, I've spent numerous hours in meetings with city staff, legal counsel, and with contractors considering how to solve the flooding problems on my property. Previous flooding events never appeared to have been as severe as the property has seen in recent years. And that's why this ordinance is so important. I and others who have looked at this flooding believe there has been a substantial increase in upstream runoff due in part to construction projects which are excessively close to the stream channel. Increased runoff is not only caused by Hill Place construction upstream from me, but also other developments upstream which necessitated expansion of the flood zones according to FEMA. I'm required to carry flood insurance on my home as long as the property is mortgaged. In the case of my 30-year mortgage, I will spend $43,890 on flood insurance alone. While this ordinance was being thoroughly researched by city staff who were simultaneously reaching out to the city residents such as myself, I attended a planning commission meeting to consider the ordinance and asked that it include provisions to assist a homeowner such as myself to protect his or her home from future flood events similar to mine. One of the amendments that came out of the conversations with city staff and planning commissioners was to allow property owners to construct a berm to prevent flooding to my home against future flood events. The construction of a flood barrier and other measures to prevent flooding to my home is estimated at $42,239 and will be allowed by this ordinance. Thank you for considering the challenges that affect Fayetteville residents, particularly unique situations such as the home that I bought. Yet another cost that this ordinance will help property owners protect against is the real loss in market value of a home which is relocated in an expanded FEMA flood zone versus one which is not located in a flood zone. And I've had a great deal of difficulty assessing that value loss, but I think we can assume that it's pretty substantial. This ordinance will protect homeowners from direct losses in property value now and well into the future. Support for this ordinance helps prevent expansion of FEMA flood zones by reducing the frequency of flash flood events. This ordinance reduces the very real threat of floods for residents who live along streams all over Fayetteville and outside our city limits, especially those downstream. It will particularly protect residents who don't have the finances to protect their homes or their property, such as building a berm. And last but not least, your passage of this ordinance will help keep our drinking water safe, healthy, and reduce taxpayer costs for doing so in the future. Finally, I would like to thank city staff again for their work on this ordinance and the Planning Commission for their thorough consideration of Fayetteville residents' concerns during the numerous public input opportunities. Commissioners and city staff members have been very thorough in engaging with me, my neighbors, and the citizens of Fayetteville who are affected by this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor, my name is Pat Tobin. I own a little bit of property here in Fayetteville. Before you tonight is a special interest ordinance. One can look around and find numerous purposes, numerous courses, special legislation, special projects one can sponsor and support. Some of these are good, some of these are bad. I feel like this ordinance that's proposed is bad. Where are we going when government can come on one's property and take it without just compensation, just by the passing of an ordinance, of a piece of paper? If you'd have told somebody 20 years ago that the city government could just come in, take your property for a special interest group or whatever, they would have thought you crazy. The city has already too many ordinances for the city citizens to bear. The city dictates what kind of buildings you can build, where you build it, what color it is, what shape it is, how many trees you plant, and where the trees are planted. Where are we going on this? Too far. One newspaper article indicated that by passing this ordinance, it would encourage the city, and the city would have a better possibility of gaining federal money. This in itself is a poor reason to pass an ordinance, especially since the federal government is broke. The city of Fayetteville probably has more money than the federal government. The Sunday article in the Times indicated that there was no property boundaries on this water resource. And we're starting with 50 feet. Knowing government will start at 50 and go upwards. They very seldom ever go down. The paper also indicated a possibility of higher standards. How will they affect people's property and people's property rights? When one considers the large number of creeks, streams, drainage ditches, etc., that we have here in Fayetteville, the enforcement of this ordinance is going to be great. The city code officers that are in place now will probably be assigned to adhere to this, even though, as I've heard tonight, that it will be complaint driven. That's an easy out, complaint driven. It will increase the staff. It will increase the cost tremendously. You will have neighbors against neighbors on this, turning people in. For a true picture of what a person or what your property will look like, all one has to do is take a drive or a boat trip on Beaver Lake and see the debris, the dead trees, the trash that are growing up on core property that abates individual property because they cannot mow it, cut a tree down, or do anything. If they do, they can be fined heavily. The same thing can happen with this ordinance. If this ordinance is so important, the citizens of Fayetteville should be given a chance to vote on it. A vote. Thank you.
Folks, please, go ahead, Mr. Cole. Thank you.
Mayor, council members, my name is Steve Lyle. I'm an attorney from Springdale. I'm here on behalf of May Farm and some other property owners along Clear Creek that would be affected by this ordinance. And my clients and I, we drink the water out of Beaver Lake just like everybody else, and nobody is here standing up in favor of polluting the water system or erosion or any of those things. And I'm concerned about the debate seems to be, you know, are you in favor of environmental protection, yes or no? And this is an ordinance that environmentalists, reasonable environmentalists, can disagree about. I think that the benefits of this ordinance, based on the materials that you have from the EPA, have been vastly overstated as far as reducing anything like the nutrient levels that are a problem with the city. And there is a tremendous cost to these landowners. I do it, I'm sure everybody else does. You can look across your fence and you can come up with a long list of things your neighbor ought to do better and things that would help your property values. But for every 200 feet of stream frontage, you're asking these property owners to essentially donate what would be a residential lot in the city to the idea of a filtering system for everybody, for the benefit of everybody. That's a tremendous cost when you consider most people, if they own any property, maybe own one residential lot. So it's not without cost. So I think you really need to carefully weigh the benefit of the ordinance, because I know this city has a strongly stated position of being in favor of environmental protection, and I don't think you'll find a lot of people that deny that or deny that that's a good thing. But the EPA, the report, the meta report, I believe this is a report that was referred to earlier, the science was about nutrients in the water. The EPA already mentions there are 14 United States code sections that deal with effluent and buffers, specifically with riparian buffers. There are 47 additional federal codes of regulation that deal with riparian buffers. And like was mentioned earlier, most of those do deal with point source activities and point source polluters, but that's not by coincidence. That's because that's where the problem primarily comes from. If the EPA thought that an individual landowner mowing his yard within 25 feet of the stream was the problem, they could address that problem. The problem is industrial activities and sewer plants and things like that that are large producers of large amounts of nutrients that go straight into the water system. The only quantifiable measure you've had about pollution has to do with your own sewer plant. I don't think it's if you're going to stand up in favor of environmental control and environmental protection and in safe drinking water, don't you have to look at that first? Can you say, well, we don't want to accept that cost, but we want somebody else to do that? Is that really forward-looking and a genuine commitment to environmental protection? How can that be? The only thing that has been shown to affect the water quality that we've heard from tonight was the city of Fayetteville making changes in its water sewer plant. And the erosion issues you've seen, that was the erosion events you see in those pictures. I guarantee you any change in the FEMA floodplain was caused by somebody doing a large-scale development or a subdivision and containing stormwater into a concrete or a steel pipe and pointing it downstream. That's what happened. It wasn't somebody in those pictures who mowed their grass too close to the stream. That had nothing to do with that level of water. So in the numbers you've been given, if you look at the EPA report, the first thing it says is buffer zones have some benefit, but the main problem is the amount of nutrient that's coming to the land. Any amount of buffer zone can only handle so much nutrients. You're doing nothing to address the amount of nutrients, nitrogen, and other things that are being put into the groundwater upstream. So everybody else in town is free to fertilize their lawn and do whatever they want, but if you happen to be the person who invested in land next to the stream, you've got to clean it up. And the measure that you're dealing with, there's been no quantifiable. Are you trying to reduce all nutrients that go into the water? Is that the goal, 0? Because if you just want to reduce half of it, or some number, you could do it with 10 feet, not 50 feet, according to these studies. So what is the goal? Is it just to eliminate all of it? Is it just to eliminate enough so that the sewer plant doesn't have to do any improvements? And everybody who stood up in favor of clean drinking water should be asking that same question. Is this going to have a significant impact, or do we need to look at bigger issues? Before you vote this up or down and put this obligation on to your landowners that happen to be the people who, by the way, liked the land nobody bought land on the stream because they wanted to tear it up and pollute it. They bought it because they appreciated it and they want to protect it. Before you place the burden of cleaning up all the nutrients in the town, in the drainage basins of Fayetteville, on those people, I ask you to first take a look at yourselves, look at the improvements that can be made as a general cost and a better and a stronger benefit to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.